Today we're going to talk about gauge. And you see that we have 4 swatches here. They're all different weights. This is Spud and Chloe Outer. It's a bulky weight. This is Brisbane. It's a Aran. Kenzie is a worsted, which is the most commonly used yarn weight, which is worsted. And then Tough Love Sock, which is sock or fingering weight. And as you look at the stitches, you can see that they're a variety of different sizes. I usually tell customers that gauge size is like cups. So if you were making a cake and you needed 4 cups of flour in your cake, and you used this version, which we were going to just say that 1 stitch equals 1 cup, you do 4 cups. This one, which we're going to just say is a half a, it would be to equal that same size as this stitch, you'd need 2 stitches, so it would be like using a half a cup. Now you have to put in 8 half cups in your cake, and just down the line. That analogy may be confusing to you. I think it works really well in that you need more stitches per inch to make up for a garment, or more actual physical scoops of something per cup to make something happen. Same idea. So when you're making a garment, if you're off by a stitch or 2 in a larger weight yarn, you could be off inches. So if you're off 1.5 stitches per 4 inches, when you cast on 40 stitches, you'd be off by 10.5 stitches, which would make something really, really large. Or the opposite, it would make it way too small. As you get smaller and smaller, say down to fingering or sock weight, if you were off a stitch or so in 40 inches, it's probably less, going to have less of an impact on your garment. But still, it could be a size difference. A size is usually an inch or so different in the circumference of a sweater. So for those of you who've made a sweater that's way too big or way too small, you'll understand that 1 or 2 stitches per 4 inches can make a difference. And it's very important to make a gauge swatch based on a 4-inch at least swath, and to kind of recount your stitches as you get further along. So I'm going to take this aside, put these aside, and we're going to just look at this big swatch so that we can see, 1, how to count stitches and how to count gauge, because counting stitches can also be difficult. So stitches are run across, because if you had your knitting needle in your stitches, they would be running on a row like that. So this is a row. I use double point needles often to fix things or to make changes in a garment or something. So if you're a new kid and you're really confused, you could probably put your needle in here just to keep it clear where your stitches were, and put your ruler above. I like to use these big clear plastic rulers because you can see through them and see the stitches, and you have a clear view of where the inches lay. So here we are. We lay our ruler on to our stitches. We try to stay away from the edge, so we're just going to move in 1. I like to start at 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.5 stitches in 4 inches. So for this, there's not a lot of wiggle room if you make a mistake by 1 stitch or not. The next thing I want to show you with gauge or with counting your stitches and gauge, is that you have something called a row. So a row is a column of stitches that are going vertically up from the bottom of the garment to the top. When you're trying to count rows, you're going to look for the bottom of a V. So see, these are sort of an oval-shaped stitch. There's a V there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And then we change to a purl stitch. So when I count rows, I always use something pointy so that I don't get off the column, and when I need to take a breath, I don't forget where I am. I try to stop at a certain number because I play all these games with myself so that I don't get confused. When you count rows, because oftentimes gauge has stitches and rows, you're going to lay your ruler along a stitch column. So we've seen that stitch column. See here, all these little V's. And we're going to count the stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 rows in 4 inches. Now you might be curious as to why we were 9.5 stitches across in 4 inches and 14 rows in 4 inches. Well, rows are more narrow than stitches. So stitches are wider than rows. And that can cause complication when you're doing something. If you think knitting is square, like every stitch is a square number, it is not. They're skinnier than they are wide. So that's why when you're looking at a garment, say, they tell you to pick up stitches along the neck or along the front edge at a ratio of 3:4. It's because stitches are wider than they are long. I'm going to put this guy aside, and we're going to look at a smaller yarn. So this is fingering weight yarn or sock weight yarn. It was knit on a size 1 needle. The other one was knit on like a size 13 needle. So even as you're looking at those, you'll understand that the circumference of a needle has everything to do with the size of the stitch. So now let's look at these. It's a little bit harder to see our stitch columns because we're using a yarn that is not really, that is a little bit variegated. So we have some rows here of different colors, but we're just going to find one. We're going to look at this white portion here, and we're going to lay our ruler right along that little white bit. And we're going to count our stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Whoop, let's try that again. This is why I use a pointy object to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33 and a half. 33 and a half stitches in 4 inches. The typical sock yarn is 32 stitches in 4 inches, so we're pretty close to gauge. And if we were off a half a stitch in 32 stitches, it's going to have less of an impact, but still an impact on what we're doing. Same thing with rows. We can count. You can see that the row count is different than when we're doing the row count on our bulkier yarn. If we were trying to make life easy on ourselves, we could just do 3 inches for our gauge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 18, 19, 20. So we have 33 stitches in rows in 3 inches, so it's really 11 rows an inch. So we're at 44 rows per inch on this, 44 rows in 4 inches on this particular sock yarn. So we're at 32 and a half stitches and 44 rows in 4 inches. So that's a decent kind of gauge for a sock. So using a size 1 needle would make this nice dense fabric. And we could compare those numbers to our big gauge on our pattern. So now let's look another way to count rows. Some people like to count rows using the back side. So there's smiles and there's frowns. So smiles are the yarn that's between the stitches, and the frowns are the stitches. So if you're someone who likes to count frowns, who knows why? It's not my preferred way, but some people like it. You can just count the frowns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Perfect. One other little quick counting thing is in garter stitch works like corduroy in that there's peaks and valleys, and every peak is 2 rows. So if we were to count this as rows and garters, we'd count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 rows of garter by just counting those ridges. So today you have a counting and quick gauge lesson. Thank you for watching.